basics of recognising and handling conflict. So people attending, so if you want to send any messages that you want me to see or the other participants, as Sam said, please type that in the box at the bottom of the screen and make sure that you select all participants. We've got some time now to think about the basics of recognising and handling conflict. And lately, what I wanted to do today is to look at a range of styles for handling conflict or responding to conflict. You have more choice about how you behave when you're faced with conflict. So the premise of this session really is that you have more available to you about how you respond or handle conflict when you're faced with it. Start off by thinking about what is conflict, and there are a couple of things that I think it's useful to think about. One is a situation in which the concerns of two or more people appear incompatible. And I put here in italics because it might be that on the surface it seems that they're incompatible, but if you take some time to think about it, they're perhaps not as incompatible as they seem initially. Or it could be a very active and obvious disagreement between people, and might be about having differing opinions, different goals, differing values. It could be either of those, so maybe keep those in mind as we go through the session. Things which appear to be incompatible or where there's an active disagreement. Something else to think about is that actually is a real opportunity and a positive opportunity. Some of these things. So to be more innovative, and we'll look at that a little later when we look at different styles. It can be to resolve differences, and to think of different ways of thinking about situations, to move on, hopefully to improve working relationships. With this session, that conflict is a positive opportunity. That's the way that we're thinking about it. The other thing to say was that if you've got any questions at any time during the session, please feel free to ask them as we go along, and I'll make sure that and see those and hear those, and I'll answer them as we go through. In a little while, at 5 different of handling conflict, but there are 2 C's you might want to think about. So from the left, it talks about assertiveness, the importance you place on your own interests. So in this model, assertiveness means being the amount of importance that you place on your interests. At bottom axis, you can see cooperativeness, and that the importance that you place on other people's interests. So with the styles, we're going to look at both of those axes. But I will be thinking about assertiveness more broadly to begin with, just to give a bit of context when we get into the session about the styles. So start off by thinking about aggression, and these styles are taken from a book called Assertiveness at Work by a gentleman called Ken Back. So interested, that might be something to look at in a bit more detail. Describes aggression as stone rights, but doing it in a way that violates the rights of others, or dismissing the need or opinions of other people. So about your own rights, but perhaps ignoring, dismissing others. And he do that for a number of reasons. One might we feel threatened, and our threat response is really important when we're thinking about conflict, because we've had previous experiences with individuals or similar situations, frustrated with the best approach, or you have to get there before they get you some sort of stress, which might be making an aggressive response more likely, or not have an alternative that's more assertive. So that's some of what we're going to think about in the remote this session. The scale, non-assertion, might be about failing to stand up for your rights or opinions, or in a way that's easy to disregard, or expressing your needs or wants in an apologetic or diffident way, through your body language as much as it can through your words. So perhaps if your body language looks assertive or looks not assertive, then people might misinterpret the words. Just maybe not wanting to express your opinions or feelings honestly, straightforwardly. Happen? Well, we're afraid that if we speak our mind or say what we think, there could be pleasant consequences. We're concerned that people might be angry or they won't like me if I say what I think. So even a stronger view that I might get sacked. Or I've been brought up to not speak my mind and to believe that it's rude to do that. Or maybe I just dislike conflict and actually I just want to keep the peace and have an easy life. I don't want to upset people. So that's why I have a general tendency to be less assertive. But all of this is that one or other of these will move between aggression, non-assertion and assertiveness in lots of different situations. Sit somewhere in the middle of those two things. And it's standing up for what you believe in, your values, what you believe your rights are, but it doesn't violate other people's rights or beliefs or values. So it's this and that approach. I have interests, I have beliefs, things are me, and I understand that the same is true for you. And it's about open and honest and direct and appropriate with beliefs and opinions. So it's this and that in terms of assertiveness. Of assertiveness is, as I've said, you met, other people have needs that need to be met. You have rights, so do others. You have something to contribute, and so do others. And the assertiveness is to try and satisfy the needs and of both parties or all parties, purely with lots of people. Let's move on to thinking about the conflict handling styles. And I'm going to do this. Is talk through each of the different styles to describe a little bit about the style, to think about it might be an appropriate or useful style to use, and also about when perhaps it's not so useful. And when we talked about all of those styles, I've got a couple of scenarios that I'd like you to consider and share your views about which these styles might be most useful to use in those situations. Make yourself some notes at this point, so when we come on to the scenarios, you've got some things to refer back to. That's great. So, just things to say about this first. And this is a model called Thomas Kilmann, which some of you may have heard of. It's Kilmann's conflict handling model. What I say is, each is capable of using all of the conflict handling modes. We might be more comfortable with a particular style, and therefore we might become on that model. It might be because that's something to do with our temperament or predisposition, or maybe we've just learned to use that so we're more practiced in it. way of handling conflict will be of both your own predisposition, the extent to which you're less focused on the rest of others or more or less focused on your own interests. Also, and this is perhaps the most important thing to think about in this session, is what does the situation require? What would be most effective styles to use in the situation that you find yourself in? And we'll get to that at the end of the session. I'm going to leave you with some questions to think about in terms of what you might use more frequently, whether or not that's working for you, and therefore how you could develop flexibility. So like the style that they describe as competing initially. I'm not entirely sure competing is the right phraseology. It's potentially that word sometimes has negative connotations. I want to describe a little bit about it because it's actually a really useful style to use. Pursuing your own concern, and it's about pursuing your own concerns, less regard for others' interests or opinions. So quite power orientated, and use various different means for asserting power. So you're very strong in arguing, you may have particular positional power, or in some situations we might use sanctions. Essentially, competing means standing up for your rights, standing up for what you believe in, and defending a position which you believe is correct. So essentially to win, it's about being really clear about what's important to me and standing up for that, no matter what. This be appropriate? A number of situations. First and foremost, when resolving the conflict is urgent, action is vital in a crisis. So thinking about a few situations, one might be a very obvious one, which is you're in the middle of something and there's a fire. Not to conflate out how to approach that situation, but to make a decision and to say, this is the way we're going to go, this is how we need to get out of the building. At an event, holding an event somewhere, hour goes off. Again, to make a decision, there might be lots of different views about how to approach that, but actually at some point, somebody just needs to say, this is the way we're going to do it. It might be a couple of surgeons are in the middle of an operation and something's starting to go wrong, and actually they're differing opinions what to do. Somebody has to take a decision and say, no, this is what we should do. When there are unpopular decisions that need to be implemented, some has to be the person that says, this is the way forward, this is the decision, this is what we need to do. And that is where perhaps fostering relationships is not as critical. So it's a relationship-focused style and more about taking action, standing for what you believe in. Might be some of the downsides of this style. So, and I've put quite a lot of content into this. I won't go through everything, but I wanted to make sure that you had the content so that you can refer back to it if you want to in the future. The disadvantages of a competing style. It can relationships, which can lead to movement. It can feel intimidated, and that might mean that people feel inhibited. They perhaps don't feel as comfortable putting forward their ideas. And so in this style, you might lose out getting some of those contributions. In this, if the drive is for power and control, sometimes that can override what's important for the organisation. And the second to last bullet point, it may mean that the person doesn't know when it's useful to take another stance. the other bullet points, it can result in diminished commitment and support. So what's to it? Overuse of this style, as with any of the styles, can have some disadvantages. I'm thinking about when, in your situations, would this be a useful style for you to use? So we're going to the opposite style, which is about avoiding. And in this style is both unassertive and cooperative, because the person doesn't pursue their own concerns or they don't deal with the conflict. So that look like in practice, that take the full sidestepping an issue. It might want to postpone an issue until a better time. Withdraw from a situation that you perceive as threatening. Avoid can take many different forms. Might an avoiding style be a useful thing to do? It be that an issue trivial and is more important or pressing. So, for instance, I'm having quite a lot of work done in my house at the moment. I'm trying to look at the progress at the weekend. And there were several things that I wasn't very happy with. It was avoid, or not one of the problems that I could see. Because actually, what were important to me were some of the other things. So I decided that the of things more important to me, element of the work that I would avoid and not bring up. So for me, confronting the conflict that might have been around that actually outweighed the benefits in addressing it. The other thing that's really useful to think about is, which is, if a situation has got heated, it might be useful to avoid taking on right there in the moment. So it's really important to say, let's take a break, let's get some perspective on the situation, let's regain our composure, let's come back to this in a few days' time, because now isn't the right time to address something. I don't want to make a rushed decision. You want some more information. You're not the best person to resolve conflict, that actually there's somebody more skillful or appropriate or has more information or is in a different position than you, who perhaps could deal with the conflict more effectively. And I think that's a very useful question to ask yourself, is, am I the right person actually to be handling this conflict? Is there somebody who has a relationship or better information who might do this more effectively? You may decide that the conflict that you're getting involved in actually isn't the real issue, and so it's really not worth pursuing it, that there are more important things that you want to do. Many reasons why using an avoiding style might be appropriate. Downside of this style, I guess, that conflicts don't get resolved, and obviously that can lead to resistance, irritation. Some of this is a style that you use repeatedly, or it's your style that you test most of the time. People can start to walk over you. And so people may perceive that you don't care enough about the issue or them because you're not willing to address it or to discuss it. But again, there are times when this style is a really useful one to use. So on to the accommodating style. This comes next, and then we're also going to look at compromising, and these two have some similarities. again is very different than the competing style that we first looked at. It's innovative and also cooperative. So what does it might choose to neglect or put to one side your concerns and be more focused on the other person and what they want or what they need. So there is an element of self-sacrifice in this mode style. So, like again, it's about being maybe very generous. It might be obeying somebody else's orders or yielding to another's point of view. For instance, you might decide that somebody is asking you to do something, and generally speaking, that isn't something that you would normally do, or it's outside of your roles and responsibilities, or outside of a process. But actually, it's really important to build the relationship, and so decide that in that instance, you're going to accommodate that person's request, because in the longer term, that might be useful for the relationship going forward. So that's why it might be appropriate. So the accommodating style is appropriate when you want to build a relationship, and that's more important than winning or getting your point of view across in that moment. These styles are useful all the time. It's about being flexible and choosing when you want to use different styles. Decide that you want to support the other person and it's not a significant personal cost. In this moment, giving that person what they want, doing what they need you to do, is not cost you greatly. Of course, it may well be important to make it clear that it is a one-off, or that in this instance, that's what you're choosing to do. I realise that in that instance, having listened to the different points of view, that actually isn't right in the first place. There's more information that you perhaps haven't considered. Actually, accommodating somebody else's views is the right thing to do. So decide that actually what's really important in the moment is to restore some level of harmony, because actually for the future and for the bigger picture, that's what's really important in the moment. So decide that a positive outcome is difficult, that actually it's better just to move on in this instance. So again, why you might decide that actually accommodating during conflict is a useful thing to do. Sides to this. Is used repeatedly, maybe that you feel that it's difficult to an outcome that's fair or acceptable to you. You might be in a weak position. Maybe that you begin to feel resentful and met from yourself and others. So we at a few aggression, sometimes as a result of frustration. Some people who use this style repeatedly can end up feeling quite frustrated and then can flip in perhaps a more competing style. So again, you use in certain circumstances, but like the styles, necessarily a good one to use repeatedly. So compromising, the kind of moderate style. It's moderately assertive and moderately cooperative. And finding some expedient, mutually acceptable solution that fully satisfies both parties. Competing but accommodating, and more directly addressing a situation than avoiding. But it does much depth as collaborating, which we'll look at in a moment. So difference, it might mean exchanging concessions or seeking a middle ground. So what would be a useful style to use? Lots of areas where it's appropriate. So if the welfare of the organisation that you're in would benefit from this, when you feel that differences have been aired and move forward, when it's to totally satisfy everybody involved in the disagreement. In a moment, I'll talk a bit more about my building scenario. So then it is really the case that actually the goals, the opinions of each party or parties have equal importance and merit. You might just need to resolve this quickly, even if only temporarily. It works well when there are options and you can negotiate. You also becomes fairly important to me, but actually I haven't got time to explore in the sort of depth that it needs to really collaborate. When family relationships is important than the outcomes of the disagreement. So, for instance, with my builder, there were a number of things, as I said, that I was unhappy with, and I knew that in a number of those instances it would be against wishes to do something about them. What we decided to do was we stand firm on some of the things that we wanted, but we would compromise. And as in this slide, we would exchange concessions. A bit of give and take. He would do some things that we wanted to do that we knew were difficult for him. We would pull back on some of the things that we wanted that we knew would be difficult. So it was a bit of give and take. There were concerns on both sides. Our way through to a situation. The other instance that you might often find quoted when thinking about compromising, particularly in contrast to collaboration, is a situation where two people are baking a cake and they need a lemon for the cake and one lemon available. Using style to that situation might be to cut the lemon in half, and so party gets what they want. But we'll come back in a minute to look at how a collaborating style might be more useful in that situation. What's the downside of compromising? So the big thing I think to think about is the second bullet point. The fine might be one that is acceptable, but it need not be optimal. Situation with a builder, it may well be, as you see in this third bullet point, that both parties feel like there's been some sort of loss. They haven't quite got the optimal solution that they wanted. So all had to give something up, and mean that nobody is truly satisfied. And in long term, that may mean that the situation is perpetuated. I'm sure you've seen situations where people say, "Okay, we'll agree to disagree," but actually a few weeks later, the situation comes round again. And so, I want to think about in a compromising style. It really does mean that both parties have to be willing to give some of what they want and really accept that and to move on and to realise the reasons why they're doing that, because it's more beneficial in the longer term. styles to look at is collaborating, assertive and cooperative. So this is akin to the definition of assertiveness that I mentioned right at the beginning of the session. Coaching is about how to genuinely work with others to find a solution that satisfies all of our concerns. Dig into an issue to really understand what are the underlying needs and wants of two people. And it might be looking at disagreement so that I can genuinely learn what are your insights. And this is the style that Thomas would say is more likely to generate a really creative solution. So to explore everybody's views and to come up with a collaborative, creative solution. So why might this be useful? Useful, both the issue and quality of the relationship are important. And it's important for you to both get a creative solution to really deal with you and also to maintain the relationship. Collaboration is really useful when you've got a really complex issue. So we know there are no quick fixes. It's really important to get a broad understanding. And actually understanding the interrelationships among factors is important. When you want to be innovative and where a genuine willingness to trust and openly listen to alternative ideas. That you as an individual, if you decide to use this style, what needs to do is something that is desired for all and not just focusing on your individual goals. So it means, as with others, perhaps even more so here, when willingness to listen to others, to take forward other ideas, to flex your opinions, desired solutions in a situation. Think about the lemon example. What happened in the compromising style was that both people got half a lemon. Because if we'd taken the time to understand important to both sets of people in that situation, so their requirements, we discovered one person wanted the juice of the lemon and one person wanted the rind of the lemon. They both have had what they wanted in a far fuller way, so all of the rind of the lemon, all of the juice of the lemon, if to find out those requirements. Whereas compromising style, actually they ended up with half of what they both needed. So this style can lead to a more creative situation. The downsides of using a collaborating style. So in a very stressful situation, so as I said at the beginning, or lights have just gone off in an event, it's likely that you won't have the right mental clarity to engage in a productive dialogue about what are all the different ways of approaching this. So if or if the situation of stress, this might be such a useful style. So decide in that instance it would be useful to use the avoiding style, to give people time to relax and to think creatively, and at a later point come back to using a more collaborating style. More time consuming, and decide that actually you just don't have the time for this level of exploration. And some third bullet point, there is only one way through a situation. So actually trying to use a collaborative style might be a waste of time. And this style absolutely means that build trust. In a particular culture or reward system, that trust doesn't exist. Then you might decide that using a collaborating mode is the thing to do. So style, you need to communicate verbally and non-verbally in ways that fully respect and honour the other person. Thinking about using these styles, it's about thinking about to what extent is that possible, is that desirable in a given circumstances. Innermost feelings and really listen, then absolutely a high level of interpersonal skills needed. It's important that you can feel to do this in a non-defensive manner. Context around the collaborating style, lots of things that need to be in place. So quite some relationship building that's happened before that may be necessary for this style to really work effectively. But I said at the beginning of this style, it's one of the styles that can lead to really creative, innovative solutions meet everybody's needs. So this is of that really. So getting to when collaborating, focusing on the relationship, focus on interest, what's important to all of us, what do we have in common, what are we all trying to achieve, and then thinking about how we generate a variety of options. So I think it's useful to think about a couple of scenarios. And this instance is to store responses in the box so that everybody can see them and get the benefit of everybody's views on what styles might be useful. So the situation, the union wants a rise in their block grant capabilities, but your principal or vice chancellor is reluctant to that rise, and they continue to bring that up at the committee meetings and openly criticise your chief exec. So think about what of those styles might be useful. So what are useful to compete or avoid or accommodate or collaborate instances. Responses in the box, that would be great. Hear from Sam, there are only 2 of you, so if you want to talk, that's completely fine. In fact, probably useful at this point. Your mics, that's, if not, you can just type your answers in the box. Any response? I'll type, I think. Hi, thanks for letting us know that. So if you've got any views about what of the styles would be useful, then feel free to add that into the chat box if you've got a view. Or question.
I've muted both of your mics now, so maybe you can vote.
Hello. Hello. We've got Becky and Vicky. Great. Any ideas about what styles might be useful in this situation?
I think the collaborative is probably the most useful.
Yeah. So who's this talking?
Vicky.
Hi, Vicky. No, that's great.
Okay.
So what do you say to that?
Because I think it's useful to try and get to a point where you can see is that you're both trying to invest in by giving the union money.
Yeah.
And if the university cares about, say, NSS scores, and it's, the Students' Union is like trying to develop the work it's doing to help improve NSS scores, whether that be through academic representation, something size, whatever. And talking about like the value of investing might make the university see why it's useful, which then they might channel some of the money that they want to use to improve those things through the union rather than doing it out with.
Yeah. What do you think, Vicky? You got a view?
I would think that would be the best one, but I think we have to consider they open the Christmas staff, and that maybe needs something in the relationship that needs to be addressed as well. And probably through the collaborative approach in terms of laying the ground, but also having that true understanding. It can be difficult if that's what their view is. We have a situation here where many years ago the union got into some financial trouble, and it's almost like the university still punishes us 30 years later for something that happened all that time ago.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on the history as well, and you might have a mixture of the approach you use in different meetings, depending on if you come to a solution at the very end, or if there's particular issues that need to be addressed, like financial.
And it might be in that situation that some clients, so maybe finding a way to raise some income and getting some more grants, so sort of a bit of demonstration that there's some compromising going on might be useful. Fab. So here's another one. What would be useful in that instance?
Probably more relatable to officers. So I don't know what officers, but you know, I still have nothing on it.
Question: are you both officers or are you staff?
Okay.
Staff, Becky?
And staff as well.
Okay, this maybe isn't as relevant.
Maybe think about what you would advise your officers to do in this instance.
I think I would probably advise officers to be quite accommodating. Perhaps to give some examples of what they have been doing. They've maybe not been promoting that information enough. Sort of like agreeing with the students that perhaps they've not been putting out what they've been doing enough. So the students feel that they're like, because the whole process of council and accountability online is supposed to be one of sort of self-sacrifice, I suppose, from an officer's perspective, because it's not like you're trying to encourage students to do that more often. And if you went straight in with like, okay, well, let's try and find a compromise on this, like they might feel like they're able to keep questioning there. So I think accommodation might be useful if you don't feel like you're going to be put in too much of a weak position.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example of where thinking about the relationship and the longer term benefits is really critical, isn't it? Yeah, great point. Okay. Any other thoughts on that one?
I'd agree that if how the student feels, then the officer needs to take them on board and perhaps start them in the long term, and how they go from perhaps being in an accommodating position to the students do feel like the wider union do care about their membership. The relationship clearly needs to be built.
Yeah. I think both of these is really useful to think about. It might be a combination of styles that need to be used, so it isn't one or other. It's, like move from avoiding to accommodating to collaborating over time. So conscious, we've got about 10 minutes. This was a set of questions I thought would be useful for you to go away and contemplate. So to think about which of the styles do you think you most often adopt, and do that in what situations, and whether that's been effective or not. And that's that, which do you find it easiest to use and which do you find it hardest to use. You might go about developing some flexibility, kind of planning to go through that, just really to leave those with you to have a think about. So that's kind of it from me. Anything you want to ask, or Sam, if there's anything you want to add?
From me, but Vicky and Becky, you might have something.
Vicky, yeah, anything you want to say?
Just thank you. I have to go now, but someone at the door. So thank you very much for listening stuff to think about there.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Vicky,
anything you want to add?
No, it was really interesting. It's quite helpful to think about it in the context of the whole organisation and different approaches and my own approaches and how I would want to approach things in the future. Yeah.
Where are you based, Vicky?
I'm at UCL.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you want a conversation subsequently about here's a station I would do it, feel free to give me a ring if you want to. Should I give you a mobile? Sorry, I'm fiddling around because I need to paste some. Okay. Brilliant.
Will we copy the slide? Can I download? Is that a thing?
It'll all be recorded, Vicky, and put on Connect within the next few days or so.
Okay, thanks, Sam.
No worries. Got the record now.
And I'm going to send you a survey